Welcome to a football show, Thursday edition. My name is Braden Gall. That is Zach Lyons. Zach is literally everywhere, all across Nashville media this week. You got football and other F words. You got a football show. You got stackingtheinbox.com. You're writing at paulkarski.com. Now you're on the Paul Karski podcast as well. There's a million things to do today on the show. If you want to jump into the comments and ask,
best episode ever of the Paul Karski podcast.
Does Paul Karski say that?
People are saying, people are in the tweets, in the chat.
Many people. So if you want to get into the chat, into the comments, we will have some time for your questions. We're going to dive deep into the wide receiver position, give you some names. Zach's got some targets for you guys for every single round. We kind of know the first round. We talked about that a little bit on Monday. We got so long into our character conversation about personality and about off the field stuff and misinformation that we didn't really get to our wide receiver conversation. So we're going to do some of that today. We're also going to have a lot of reaction to Brian Callahan being available for the first time since L'Jarius Sneed was signed, and sort of the first time now as, I guess, like he's been the head coach, obviously, but now he's like doing head coach things, like with players. And so I think some interesting insight. And I've got like two things, Zach, one that's like draft related and one that's Brian Callahan related that I want to ask you about, that is sort of like what I gleaned. And the thing that just keeps hitting me when I watch and listen to Brian Callahan talk, and there's like a through line there. So I'll present that to you guys here coming up in a little bit. Of course, Sinkers Beverages and the Kingston Group, we appreciate our two great and amazing sponsors, the Kingston Group, buildkg.com. I don't need to tell you what it's about. You guys know, if you've been listening to the show, hanging out with this show, you know exactly what the Kingston Group is all about. Nashville's locally owned custom home and remodeling firm. If you're on YouTube, give us a subscription and give us a little thumbs up. We appreciate that. And of course, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, please share, repost, retweet, whatever you want to call it. Just share the product. Tell your friends about what's going on. We really do appreciate you guys. And go pay for a subscription to stackingtheinbox.com and paulkarski.com. So there you go. I think that's all the housekeeping. We'll have some draft links as well as the draft party tickets. I think there are 4 tickets left maybe for the Friday night event. I think that's all. They are $100. Every penny goes to charity. Not one penny goes to Sinkers Beverages or to Lachlan Table or to me or to Zach. Every penny goes to help children. You get a 5-flight bourbon tasting, 5 bourbons in a flight. You're going to get a 3-course meal from Lachlan Table. We're going to have special guests, private off-the-record conversation, and we're going to watch the second and third round together. I don't know how that's not worth way more than $100, Zach. So,
I mean, that would cost you in Nashville on a night out closer to $200 to maybe even $300. I think you could easily clear over $200 with the bourbon and a 3-course meal from Lachlan Table.
Pappy, baby. Lachlan Table, Pappy. Daniel Frazier, of course, good to hear from you. Good to see you. He'll be there. I know Joe's going to be there. Elliot's going to be there. Jason's going to be there. I know we're going to have a really good crowd of like good, hardcore F words and 440 fans. I'm really, really excited about it. And again, we get to do it all to help charity. I know Stoney's coming out on Thursday. We're going to have a live show on Thursday. That ticket's only $40. You get Edley's barbecue, almost as good. And of course, all you can eat, all you can drink, and then we'll go live after the Titans make their first pick. I'm hoping, which is about pick 11, Zach. That's what I'm hoping is pick 11. I know you're on team. You're all the way on to team trade back at this point. Stoney in the comments, by the way. This shirt is for you, big guy. I wore this shirt just for you. It was given to me as a joke by a buddy of mine so that I could wear it around Disney when I went to Disney with my kids. And it says, for those listening on podcast, you cannot spell sausage without USA, baby. There you go. That's for you, Stoney. I just thought you'd like that. I thought he would like it. So I'm wearing it today on the show. All right. I do have, it is like, we're going to talk wide receivers. We're going to talk press conference. I've got a couple of questions for you here, Zach. And but like, this OJ thing is so fucking weird to me. Like, we were recording.
Live forever.
The dying of the human, not a new thing that I was thrown off by. Okay. But like when I was working with Derek Mason and Nick Cale on 102.5, we were doing a morning show, and the two of them were obsessed with OJ Simpson. They thought like he had just started getting out. He just started doing those videos where he's like, "Hey everybody, OJ Simpson here," or whatever he was doing. And then he started commenting on the Murdoch right stuff, which of course he's clearly like trolling America at this point. He's just trolling it. But D-Mace and Nick loved that shit. They loved it. I don't understand. I sat next to him. So this is my only like OJ story. I was at the Kentucky Derby in like 2006 or 7. By the way, OJ Simpson passed away this morning, just for those that don't have the background here.
He's dead.
Yeah, he gone. I was at the Kentucky Derby, and I was with we was like 8 or 10 of us. We're sitting in on like, it's not, this is going to sound braggadocious. I don't mean it this way. We're near Millionaire's Row. The seats are really not that fancy. They're just like regular, like if you've ever been to Churchill Downs, it's just like a metal bar that's around your box, right? You just kind of sit there and you can stand in that little area. OJ Simpson has a blonde with him that, I'm not kidding, she was probably, what's the line from Liar Liar where Jim Carrey's on the stand and he's like, you weigh 125 pounds? He goes, yeah, in your bra. Like, that's what he says. This woman, I'm not kidding, I have never seen proportions on a human being like this, and none of it was real. None of it was real. But OJ has a type, let's just say. And
if you can touch it, it's real. It's what you're saying is that it's artificial.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. It wasn't. God didn't make it. God didn't make any of it. And so, but he was sitting like maybe 10 feet from us, and like all of us were weirded out by it. Like, this was before the 10 years in prison or whatever it was. We were all sitting right there, and I was like, this is gross. Like, he's with a blonde girl that looks like his ex-wife that he clearly probably killed. Like, the whole thing was fucking weird, and I was grossed out by it, and I was weirded out by it. So I drank 12 mint juleps and got a terrible hangover and like had a great time. But like, I was weirded out by being 10 feet from OJ. It was that weird to me. And I don't understand, like, I love you, D-Mace. I love you, Nick. I love all the people that are like, I don't understand the obsession with him. I don't get it. I know there's layers to the trial and everything that happened in the 90s, and it's all very heavily like laced with race relations, and I get all of that. But like, the obsession with OJ in particular makes no sense to me. So I thought your reaction with Paul today was the right one.
Yeah, he's dead.
What's the deal with people being obsessed with him? Is it just because he got away with it? I don't know.
Well, I think there's like two different generations. There's a generation that was obsessed with the trial, obviously, and think that know that he did it, and all this stuff. And then there's the recent obsession, probably stemming from the was it American Crime series that popped up with John Travolta and Cuba Gooding Jr. But I think this is just we're just in the midst of a weird generation that glorifies people that make TikToks. Like, there's TikTok celebrities, TikTok chefs, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, it's just we're in a weird time that makes zero sense. Used to be, back in my day when I was growing up, celebrities used to be celebrities, not just like random people that just make stuff on TikTok anymore, or Vine. But a lot of Vine celebrities out there.
And it's not just like the quick social media 60-second immediate content creation attention economy, right? It's not just that. It's also the trolling and the dunking, right? Like, what I will give him credit for this. Like, he was brilliant at like playing up the fact that he got away with it. In without actually saying it directly, he would be like, "Hey, America, I think this guy did it." And you're like, what the fuck are you doing? Anyway, he passed away today. He's dead. I'm not sure I'm gonna lose any sleep over it. Okay, Brian Callahan is he's gone through orientation, as he called it. He is meeting with the team for the first time. They've got vet camp coming up, I believe, on the 22nd and the 24th. You got rookie camp, of course, May 10th. So there's a couple of dates to remember. Relentless and resilient, nothing new there. Those are his message to the team. Be yourself, be on time. Protect the team is a phrase that he used. So I've got a couple of reactions, but I want you to sort of first just your takeaway from Brian Callahan, who is now actually doing coach things with the actual players on the Tennessee Titans. What was your reaction to his availability on Wednesday?
I thought the questions were really trash.
Did you say that to Paul today on his show?
I did on the air and off the air. He knows that he is not one of those that that's trash questions came from. He didn't ask about the 3-4.
The 340.
But it's like everybody in the press corps started taking shots as soon as Teresa Walker asked her question. Like, they just started pounding back shots. They were asking, even Jim Wyatt was asking some basic, like, what are you asking kind of questions? And they got answers from all three coaches better better answers than those questions deserved. And I'm afraid that we're not gonna continue to get these answers better than the questions, because I kind of feel like coaches are sometimes going to get comfortable, maybe a little lazy, and we're going to miss out. Like, I know Joe said this is the golden era of Titans media press corps or whatever. Well, take advantage of it. Don't ask bad questions that just happen to be lucky that he is just such a smart enough football mind that he is able to take that and give you all kinds. I mean, like, someone asked, well, how does free agency affect your approach to the draft? Like, what the fuck are we even doing here? Like, what kind of stupid ass question is that? Can you? And then someone asked, does it ever get least shocking, or does it ever get old when you see how big these players are up close? Like,
wait.
What's going on?
Hey, hang on. I must not have heard that one. You're telling me someone asked about the size of athletes? Was this like directly related to Tavondre Sweat or something? Like what?
They didn't link it to anything. I'll pull up the if you give me a second, I can pull up.
I'll let you pull up the transcript here, because I've got like, because that's funny, because my reaction was not really about anything specific. I generally study press conferences as like human psychology experiments, right? And Vrabel was fascinating to study, but very little detail. And Nick Saban's that way. I think there's a lot of coaches that are wired that way. All right, what's the quote?
On if it ever gets less shocking to see the enormous players who come for visits, and if he feels the need to get bigger.
Like Brian Callahan needs to get bigger?
That may have been Corey Curtis, by the way. I'm not.
Come on,
sure.
Corey, you're too good.
Not sure.
You're too good.
Man, these questions were, and the answers that he gave were so good, undeserving. They were undeserving. We were undeserving of that good of a press conference by his answers with the information. I mean, like a question like that, like, of course, everybody wants to be bigger. They want to be bigger, stronger, faster. Every NFL, no NFL team says, I want to be really small and frail and weak. And he gets into a really good question. All this
soccer
stuff.
Players.
Of course, we got the dad question. Can't go without a Brian Callahan press conference without talking about his fucking dad. I don't know.
So
that one was pretty funny though.
So let me, so my takeaway is more.
I forgot about this question.
Okay, go ahead. Jesus.
On if Bill Callahan will be involved in teaching blocking techniques to special teams given the new kickoff rules. Like, what the? Yeah, assistant special teams coach Bill Callahan.
Didn't he get that question like last time he was available too?
A lot of these were combine questions and were already answered at the combine, but this was just, there's so much.
Okay. All right. So my response is my takeaway, my response is less detail oriented to his answers. So I want you to hold off on those, because I want to get your thoughts on some of the stuff that you learned. But this is the thing that keeps hitting me every time I hear him talk. And it's some of it's like Vrabel lens, right? Vrabel brain in the past. Some of it's Rand Carthon and the collaboration thing. Some of it is this overwhelming conversation that we have in society about generational softness and how we evolve as a species. So just go with me on this, because one of the very, like, literally, like on his first sentence, I think he said, protect our team as a phrase. He wants them to be themselves. He said, he uses the phrase, which again is brilliant PR in my opinion, from a leadership standpoint, which is like, hey, I'm not going to speak for him. This is what I think we should do, but I'm not going to speak for him. It's little tiny like tricks that a guy can use or a woman can use when they are in a position of leadership that is delivering a message to the press and to the fans, but also sort of being careful and cognizant of how that message lands on his team, and in this case, his players. And one of the things that I keep thinking of listening to him talk, and because I've long believed that winning the press conference, college or pro football coaches, is just dumb as shit to use as a barometer for future success. I've always believed that. Hire the best football coach. If he gives great answers, cool, better for us. If he gives bad answers, cool, worse for us. Doesn't matter, win games. Like, winning the press conference is so stupid. It's so stupid. Brian Callahan does win the press conference, though. He's very good at answering questions. He's very smart. He's very savvy. He's very articulate. He understands how the message might land with his players. So the thing that I'm taking away from this is, have we actually reached a place, because I'm 41, my kids are going to be quote unquote softer than I am, right? Like, this isn't the Junction Boys. This isn't 1954. Dust Bowl shit. Like we're not running, there's no more 2-a-days in the NFL, right? Like the practice has changed. Have we actually have players actually changed to the point where they have more power, they make more money, their bodies are more protected, that we have reached a point where someone needs to be like, they all need to be players coaches now? Does that question make sense? Like, have we reached a point where that style actually is not going to work anymore? The old school mentality of Belichick.
Hasn't the NFL kind of told us that it's not working? I mean, Bill, listen, Pro Football Talk and these people, I don't know if you saw Matt Rule say something about Bill Belichick or whatever he said, but all the people that are like pro Bill Belichick can't believe they had a job and were made to look stupid that he did not get a job. We're like, see, there's going to be teams that are going to be wishing they didn't pass a Bill Belichick because Matt Rule said this. And then you got PFT saying, well, the new special teams rule, someone needs to be hiring Bill Belichick to come in and take advantage of this new rule. A new rule that he's never coached, by the way. I mean, like, I don't know where these people are going. At the end of the day, I think because of how NFL teams are going and how younger they are and how much it's more about teaching and developing and less about managing big personalities. Because right now, teachers and coaches are needed. Teachers are needed, and not authority figures necessarily. Authoritative approaches. You get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, it's about respect rather than like earned respect versus like commanding respect, I guess maybe is the difference there.
And I would say that like you need guys that can teach you, because the players that are coming in are, first off, they're going to be so much more business savvy, so much more, but also so far behind on their development in most cases. We've talked about it before. We talked about in Football and Other F-Words about how, Jalen Duncan has all the traits in the world, wasn't coached up. These linebackers don't feel like they're very coached up. The safeties don't feel like they're very coached up, because it feels like in the NCAA, you're like coached in high school a little bit, then you're thrown into the fire in NCAA, and you're not being, more often than not, you're not being taught a lot. You're almost like a mercenary for hire. And stuff like that is kind of how Mike kind of put it. In NIL, transfer portals,
Yep.
all this stuff is going to stunt development in some cases, especially if you're learning new systems and constantly moving around from college to college. I'm all for, listen, let me say this. I'm all for players get paid, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to take a different style of coaching for this new era of college football. And I think that's why you see some of these older guys are starting to get pushed out.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Dane Quinn is kind of like in that middle range right there, where he knows how to talk to people and he could still be old school. Dan Campbell, I think, is a great example of a guy that everybody thinks is old school, but I think he really relates to his players on a personal level.
Yeah, Bo brought that up. And to your point about college football, I do think stability is going to be the most successful programs in the next 5 years, because the sport is so chaotic and changing, and players are moving and players are jumping and teams are leaving conferences, and there's a new playoff structure and all this other shit. There's going to be new rules. Bo says, this is why I love Dan Campbell, not the best at the microphone, but his players love him. First of all, I would say
I think he's great at the mic.
Yeah, I think he's very personable. But like, here's the other thing about Vrabel. Like, and again, not to bring it back to Vrabel, but he's the Titans coach. So like, he also had a ton of respect and relationships and was a very good communicator and teacher. And it was different. And what I keep thinking with Brian, and again, maybe this is ultimately how I need to sort of like wrap up the point into a more concise way, which is that he is clearly winning the press conference, and with like smarts and intelligence and being articulate and consistently. He even said you need to have a genuine understanding of the player's upbringing and their background and judge kids on the right things. Like, he's even not apologizing, but he's even like doing good PR for a kid who might have done something wrong in college. Like, everything he says is sort of protection of the team, which I think is the phrase that he used at the beginning. So ultimately what it feels like is winning the press conference never used to win you games. Is maybe now the ability to win the press conference a little more tied to the ability to motivate, teach, and win games with your players. I maybe. Do I think my kids' generation could go win World War II the way we did in 1944? No, I don't think we could. I think every generation is softer than the one before it because we provide and we learn and we evolve and we gain technology and we gain psychology and we gain leadership skills and we do get better. And some call that softer, I guess. And so I don't know. The thing that I keep taking away from all those questionable questions and very smart answers is I assume he is very good with the individual player. Having been around the league a long time also probably helps that.
Well, I mean, we know that he is. I mean, we that's one of the big selling points of Brian Callahan this whole time was how he knows how to communicate with many different players. Communicating with Tim Tebow is drastically different than communicating with Peyton Manning. Communicating with Joe Burrow, how he communicates with Orlando Brown, and all those guys that were, I think it was Orlando Brown was with the Bengals. I may be thinking of someone else. There's a guy that called him BC with the Bengals. But the way that he communicates, but we also know that he can call you out and still be your best friend. He calls you out in a respectful way that gets you motivated. And there's only a 9-year difference between Mike Vrabel and Brian Callahan, but it feels like they were brought up in different football generations.
Very much
considering
so.
that Mike Vrabel played so long. I mean, he had been in the NFL since 1997. And playing in the early 90s to mid 90s in college for Ohio State. That's an entirely different vibe because you have entirely different coaches. And I think that's what has influenced his more heavy-handed, hard-nosed style of teaching or coaching compared to what Brian Callahan is, which is a little bit more of a softer approach, a little bit more cerebral, and he can communicate with many different types of personalities because of how he came up the ranks as a coach. Whereas Mike Vrabel was very shortened in his ranks into a coach.
He also talked about when he just sort of described his workday, he described it very specifically, minute to minute. And you don't get the job without being attention to detail oriented. But like what I learned the most from Nick Saban's style and being an elite coach is sort of his management of everything he did each day and his complete and total focus on the thing in front of him. So if he's in a special teams meeting for 60 minutes, it is the best 60 minutes of special teams meeting Nick Saban's ever done. He's not thinking about recruiting. He's not thinking about the offense or the secondary. It's whatever he is doing. He is all in on the thing he is doing. And it sounds a little bit like Callahan was describing his day that way. And then he's like, oh yeah, I'm pretty scheduled down to the minute, and then by the time I sit down at dinner, I'm planning for the next day, minute by minute. So I think that there's just, again, it doesn't mean that he's going to be a great coach or they're going to win games, but I can't help but think that like maybe there is something to the, this broad societal conversation about softness when really it's evolution and that players need something different today than they needed in 1995 or 2005. And I think Callahan has that in spades. So from a detail standpoint, in his actual answers, all that great detail you're talking about, whether it's L'Jarius Sneed or draft picks or whatever, what were the things that stood out to you the most?
I think and Ed Henry talks about this. Ed Henry's not buying into the I think Ed Henry's right in that people are overblowing what he's talking about. The people are overblowing that he didn't mention Treylon Burks or Rashad Weaver to a big degree. But it is important that he did not mention those players. It is something that you have to take into account. I do think it means something. I don't think it means everything. I guess you could say. You could say, I think it means that the people who were expecting Treylon Burks to be this wide receiver 3 slot guy and the Treylon Burks renaissance was going to happen because he was going to finally play the position that he played in college that found so much success. It doesn't really sound like anybody's really factoring in Treylon Burks a lot, which is the smart thing to do, which is exactly what I've been saying the next regime needed to do was you can't factor in Treylon Burks. Traylon Burks is your I think PK called him gravy, which is maybe
house
a
money.
poke at
Yeah.
his fat joke, but he is right. Like if he succeeds, he succeeds, but he does not prevent you from drafting one or two wide receivers. That does not mean that he's automatically given a depth chart, a spot on the depth chart. Does not mean he's necessarily going to make the 53 or even be on this roster. Maybe he gets traded. But everything sounds like to me that if you're mentioning Mason Kinsey and not mentioning Traylon Burks when you're talking about the slot, that matters. Doesn't matter about the career of Traylon Burks, but it does matter that they're kind of this regime has kind of told you, right? Everything they've been very upfront. Skoronski's a guard. Dylan Radin is a guard.
Despite your
NPF
conspiracy theories.
Yeah. NPF and Jalen Duncan are going to battle it out at right tackle. Sadiq Charles is going to battle it at guard, and they've been pretty honest and upfront. And sometimes, omission is just forgetfulness, but they seem to be pretty purposeful with the words that they say. Like we have 3 tight ends. We need 3 more. We need 6 by training camp. We need more edge rushers. We only really have 2 right now. So and Arden Key is situationally, right? Like that's a huge thing to say out there, is that like, well, we only see really Arden Key as a situational pass rusher. Okay, well, then you need an edge rusher. And guess what? He didn't factor in Caleb Murphy or Rashad Weaver into that conversation. So you can say, I do agree that I think there are people out there on the radio, on social media, that are blowing it way out of proportion. But I think to just brush it off as like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, I would be very cautious with what we have learned about Brian Callahan, Rand Carthon, Denard Wilson, Nick Holtz all so far.
They said specifically, I think multiple times now, situational starter about Arden Key, right? Like they've used that phrase multiple times. So here, I've got my reaction to that would be, it's safe and smart and good PR for the coach to only sort of mention guys that are already clearly players on the team that are in starting spots. It's a safe
should not
play.
be Mason Kinsey, by the way. That name should have never came out of his mouth. That tells you a little more about Traylon Burks than Mason Kinsey in my mind.
Maybe it does. That's absolutely right. And I think he's the one that you would mention as like, okay, that one doesn't make sense. But by and large, I would, like, if I was his PR person and he was like, and I was like, look, dude, only mention names that for sure you're using. If there's a chance that you really like a guy, don't talk about him, because there's a chance he maybe doesn't make the team or doesn't earn a starting spot. So I do think that you can make more of this than, like, Traylon Burks is going to be outside of a trade, which is certainly possible. Traylon Burks is going to be on the roster, and he's going to be given a chance to achieve whatever he wants to achieve. And if he does, then it's great. It's house money, or gravy, as you said, PK says. It's complete house money. I think I've used that phrase the entire time about Traylon Burks, but I would say that about, like, he's talking about, okay, here's an example. He's talking specifically about Roger McCreary every chance that he gets. All the guys are. And it's very clear that they know who their 3 corners are and that Roger McCreary is going to play a lot. I'm using him as an example, but it's good, smart PR to not talk about, let's say, the bottom 25 players, because you just don't know what's going to happen in camp. You don't know what you're going to think or what you're going to do. And so I think that's why you don't hear a lot of, like, any of the names that we're talking about, other than Kinsey, which is weird. I agreed.
But it is also mentioned just in the slot role. When you kind of think of Mason Kinsey and Kyle Phillips, well, it's a slot only role.
Yeah.
Like, right?
Yeah.
So, that's really the only 2 guys they got that play the slot only role. But it's very interesting that he did mention that, well, Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins are not outside only guys. But then he never mentions Traylon Burks as a possibility in the slot. I think that's very important to note.
Okay, I'm with you on that. So here's one thing that keeps hitting me when he was talking about Ridley and Hopkins being sort of veteran presences to help Will Levis develop a little bit. One of the things that all of a sudden hit me today, and now I can't get it out of my brain, is, like, we've talked a lot of, you've said alt 1, trade back 2, Neighbors 3. You think they like Neighbors a lot. Neighbors certainly is a very high quality prospect, absolutely somebody that the Titans could draft, and absolutely thinking more than 1 year ahead of time is smart football. Like, planning for DeAndre Hopkins' departure is smart football. You don't always have to draft for what you just have today. You can draft for next year. You got to play the grid on your salary cap chart. But one of the things that keeps hitting me wouldn't it be? I mean, how much fun would it be to step to the line of scrimmage if you are Will Levis with Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, either Spears or Pollard in the backfield, and Brock Bowers? Like, think about where Bowers fits into that mix for the weaponry that Callahan we know wants. Scores touchdown, makes plays, picks up first downs, all that stuff. And if you put Bowers in the middle of the field with Ridley and Hopkins, that's like, if you're trying to give Will Levis as good an opportunity with weaponry and athleticism and versatility and positionless stuff, for some reason, when he talked about those two guys, I'm like, okay, Neighbors makes sense. Odunze makes sense. Harrison makes sense. That all makes total sense. But the guy who actually gives you the three dynamic weapons right away today is Brock Bowers. Am I crazy for thinking about these three guys together on the field at the same time with Will Levis?
I mean, no and yes. You got to remember they're an analytical team, so with analytics, you at this stage of roster construction, you don't take a tight end in the first round, regardless of positionless football or however you want to throw Brock Bowers, because unless you're really putting them in at the majority of wide receiver, to me, it's in this scenario that you're talking about. Neighbors fits all that just as much as Brock Bowers does, and Chig makes up the other a little bit of it. And in terms of roster construction, that just Brock Bowers to me just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense on a logical level, an emotional level. I mean, none of it just adds up. It just doesn't.
So you're saying the replacement of Bowers over Chig in the run game or in the blocking game or the versatility game versus Neighbors over, I guess, either right now it'd be Burks or Phillips or whoever else would be in that number 3 role.
And Neighbors' presence means so much more overall than Bowers' presence would.
You think the offense is better with Harrison? Sorry. Yeah, yes. The answer is yes with Harrison. You think the offense is better with Hopkins, Ridley, Neighbors, Chig, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than it would be with Hopkins, Ridley, Bowers, fill in the blank.
Yeah. Unless you're drafting a wide receiver later. I mean, because like I said, Burks is a non-factor. Kyle Phillips is a non-factor. They have shown that you cannot rely on them. Yes, absolutely. No doubt. And I think that I would say 99% of people would agree with me.
So what if they're picking 13 and he's by far the best player on the board, on their draft board?
Oh, that's a different story. But then I also question how their draft board looks, because they desperately still need a left tackle in this whole situation.
I get it. I mean, let's say they pick up like the 34th pick or some shit like that, or the 39th pick or whatever the number is, and all of a sudden they can take Paul in the second round or Kingsley in the second round, or they met with Jordan Morgan. I don't know if he's a tackle, but like, I'm just curious.
God, no, he's not.
No, I know. I just am curious. Like, you could, if you trade back and you draft two offensive linemen in the second round and you get Bauer. For some reason, my brain just went immediately to attack the middle of the field with Bowers, Ridley, and Hopkins. Like, you're going to put a lot of pressure on secondaries, and if it's about scoring touchdowns,
you put in more pressure with Neighbors and Chig, right? I mean, there's more pressure to be put on than Bowers and Goober number 1 or Goober number 2, whichever one you want to put in there, or even Mason Kinsey, since he got mentioned. You put more stress having those options than you do. That's my thing. You have more stress with Chig and Neighbors than you do with Bowers and these guys that don't stress out the defense. Like, nobody's concerned with Treylon Burks and
but how much? Okay, I didn't mean to get into this conversation, but like, maybe this is ultimately what I'm asking then, is how much do they really believe in Chig? Like, this is a guy who's had I've always really liked his game. I think he's a really smart football player. I think he's got some skills that are very appealing. I think Josh Wiley's a player with a lot of athletic ability. Too early to say anything on what he's going to be or how much he's going to learn in 1 year. And maybe that's where this is a completely idiotic conversation, that they just think Chig and Wiley are going to evolve so much into this offense that they don't need anything else. And then I'm way off my rocker
I think
here.
it's all about roster. I think what you're asking is a different conversation. What I think that the way that they are looking at it is from the perspective of what's the best way to maximize roster construction. And Brock Bowers is not the best way to maximize roster construction. And you're looking at it from the perspective of, well, are they sold on Chig? Well, they don't have to be sold on Chig to maximize roster construction, because in your case, in the case that we're talking about, Neighbors or Alt means way more than what Brock Bowers would. Now, again, best player available is how you are supposed to draft. So if you in a trade back and you're sitting there at 10 or 11, and for some reason these other the Jets, who have been heavily linked to Brock Bowers, who already have almost everything else set up around them.
True.
And they're sitting there at 11 or 12 or 13. They're like, okay, well, Brock Bowers is the best player on the board. They're gonna take him because they've told us that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna take the best player available and they're gonna take him. But that really ties your hands in maximizing the rest of your draft to fix the holes that you need to fix. Whereas Alt and Neighbors both provide you, specifically for just comparing Neighbors, where Neighbors provides you a fantastic trio of wide receivers, and you still have an average to above average pass catching tight end in a probably better suited system with a better coach.
And he fills in for Hopkins next year when Hopkins leaves. So
right. And then Neighbor fills in on the outside, whereas then you are still free to take a left tackle, and you're still free to take other stuff and maximize other areas. It's just like tight end is just such not a position of need.
No, I agree.
To me, the draft just goes terribly wrong for you if you end up with Brock Bowers. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean like it makes your team terrible. It just is not it's not the best scenario to maximize roster construction.
So, and I don't necessarily even disagree with that. It feels like a luxury pick, even at like 9 or 11 or whatever.
I don't even know if luxury is the right word, but it just feels like a pick that doesn't bode well for the rest of your draft. Like that to me is kind of how I view it.
Yeah, and I would argue something similar to, let's say, Kool-Aid McKinstry. If they don't trade back and they take Joe Alt at 7, whoever, J.C. Latham, they pick a tackle at 7. So they solve a position of need with a player that's graded out as the best available in that range. If you take Kool-Aid McKinstry at 38, a credible value, great player for the spot.
But you're going to be taking a cornerback regardless. So if you're taking the best, that's the difference. They're not taking a tight end in this draft. They're not planning to, right? Like they're probably going to get a couple guys signed off in this after thing. You're taking a cornerback in this draft more than likely. Like they're telling us with their visits, they are targeting some day 3 and trade back options. Yep. They haven't brought in a tight end yet that I'm aware of, or talked to a tight end, but that's kind of what they're telling you. So if you're taking taking Kool-Aid McKinstry is not the same thing as taking Brock Bowers, because you are going to take a cornerback likely in this draft.
I disagree a little bit. I agree with your point, but I disagree at 38, because then you're drafting your 4th string corner. And I think Brock Bowers is clearly your 1st string tight end. Like he absolutely is an upgrade over Chig and Wiley. As long as he stays healthy. I mean, he's clearly an upgrade and gives you an extreme look. I can't say for years that I think he's the best player in college football and then come on here and be like, oh, he's not an upgrade over Chig. Like, I have to say that. And I agree with that. I think that's what he is. So this brings us to the wide receiver conversation. And that is, we've got a couple of folks in the comments that have already mentioned this. Like, what about Bowers and Javon Baker? He's a name that you like a lot. James says, what about Hopkins, Ridley, Javon Baker, or Luke McCaffrey with Bowers? That's spicy. That's what he says. Bo says, I might see Braden's point here. Bowers will get middle linebacker or OLBs covering him. Might be worth a look. ? Yes, Carlos. Hello from Memphis. Tighten up. What's going on? I'm because I want you to go through the rounds and target some receivers here, and that's what we're going to do. We kind of know with the 7th pick, we know who the 3 targets are. If they trade back into the 1st round, we know that it's probably Brian Thomas Jr. middle of the first round. But if we want to start talking about the second round, we can look at 38 and we can kind of say, all right, who are the receivers that you would target there? But if I were to say they trade back to 13 or whatever, and Bowers is clearly best available on their board, and they draft him, and they're going to get another receiver later, does that make you feel better about it? Does that make you is there a name like Javon Baker in the 4th or 5th round that you think, okay, that makes more sense, even if it does screw up your draft a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's ways you have to go out of your way to figure out that you make life harder on you, and I think that's
I agree
that you make life harder on you because these guys in the 4th and 5th round, even a 3rd round, not a lot of them are projected to be outside guys, right? So you're then still needing an outside wide receiver at some point in the draft again next year. So you're in the same boat again. And it just feels like I'm trying to get the Titans out of the cycle. It's my goal for the Tennessee Titans in 2024. Get out of the cycle of every year needing a premier wide receiver. And Javon Baker could be that guy, right? But the likelihood, there's always a couple 3rd or 4th round guys that come out and they're really good, but that's a gamble. That's more of a gamble than going Neighbors and a tight end later. Because, I mean, if you went like Tip Ryman later in the 5th or 6th round, I mean, you're just getting a Josh Wiley kind of guy, and that's really all you need for tight end because you have 3 wide receivers. Like, that's the thing. When you have 3 premier wide receivers in Neighbors, or Odunze, or Marvin Harrison Jr., plus Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, that just means so much more for this particular team, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's the Bengals way, right? Like, I mean, the tight end for the Bengals is Drew Sample. Big Drew Sample guy, I'm sure everybody is. So,
Hudson, there's a guy named Hudson one time.
Hudson, I think. Yeah, I mean, CJ Uzoma, who could never stay healthy, who just signed with the Eagles. And
there was a guy out of Stanford, too, I think, that played there.
So, to me, it's like, okay, well, if you don't get Neighbors in the first round, you go Joe Walt, or you trade back and do something else. But let's say you get Joe Walt. Well, I mean, a Ricky Pearsall at pick 38, a Roman Wilson at pick 38, Xavier Legette at pick 38. Those are all guys that can. I wouldn't say maybe Wilson.
You're with Legette now? You're in on Legette?
Well, I'm just saying from the standpoint of.
He reminds me of Treylon Burks, is what he reminds me of.
Well, no, he reminds me of the opposite of Treylon Burks. If you read up on, I mean, he looks. Let me say something. If Treylon Burks looked as good as what Xavier Legette looks at any point, like just physically, like let me say this: Treylon Burks will never take his shirt off around Xavier Legette.
No, that's true. I just think in their last seasons in college, a little injury prone, about the similar size, faster playing speed than they test out, bigger body, 220.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Legette tested out really well, so. Xavier Legette had a great RAS, so he tested really, really good.
That's fair. I just think you've been out on Legette for most of this process.
Well,
so.
I have been out on Legette, but then I've done research on his background, the reason why it looks like a 1-year wonder and all that kind of stuff. You know, Brett Coleman has a really good thread about it. I've watched a little bit more tape. I pick 38 still a little rich, but what I'm talking about is like second round wide receivers that provide you the outside flexibility and can be contributors this year in certain ways. I go back and forth on Ricky Pearsall. Can he play outside in the NFL?
Yeah.
It's going to be tough, but if anybody, I would rather bank on Ricky Pearsall playing outside in the NFL than Roman Wilson or Troy Franklin, Xavier Worthy, or Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that he's got physical limitations, but he does not have technical limitations or technique limitations. He does not have red flags in pass catching, no red flags in route running.
Yep.
He's just his physical limitations by a small margin. I like Ricky Pearsall in that spot. And again, Alt plus Ricky Pearsall in the second round, or Alt plus Xavier Legette. those right there to me is better than Brock Bowers and Javon Baker in the third. If you get a pick in the third,
I think part of my brain lock here or whatever, or is just that like I don't like a receiver in the first or second round for this team unless they trade back and get a bunch of extra capital. I just don't like. It doesn't feel
it's
like
rich at 38. I agree with you. It's too rich. It's like linebacker and Junior Colson.
Well,
they need
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
They need a linebacker. They need a wide receiver. But man, taking that at 38 just feels like such a bad investment at this point. And that's the issue. That's why I'm such team trade back. Hell, trade back in the first round and trade back in the second round because you need picks because of how poor the roster, how talent poor, how youth poor the roster currently is. Not because of Rand Carthon, but because of years of missing. And this is a good draft. When you are in a good draft, you have to have as many picks as possible because you want the guys that you know are worth the shots, that are worth the draft picks, and you need to take advantage of that. And that's been the problem is that they have not previously taken advantage of deep drafts, and they've taken wild flyers.
Des Fitzpatrick instead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, so ultimately, here's the thing. Like, I do think that Brock, like, the third receiver thing to me, it just doesn't feel like it. It feels more luxurious because their roster is so filled with holes. This is not a team that is drafting with the 3-year vision yet, right? Like eventually you hope to build a team where you're stacking puzzle pieces that sort of align. When this guy's contract runs out, that's when that guy's going to be developing and taking over. Like eventually that's how you want to build a roster. But I don't think they're in a position where wide receiver 3 is I think I can make the case that if you get, and this is the same with Bowers, you have to assume that they are worth the pick. Junior Colson at 38. You have to assume that he is a starting middle linebacker for 17 games with the green dot on his helmet. Like if you're going to do it at 38, you have to assume that that's what he is. If you're going to take Brock Bowers at 7 or 13, you have to assume that he's Travis Kelce, right? Like he has to be that good to make that pick work for your team. And if he is that
healthy,
agreed.
That's
and if
the
he
big
is
thing for me.
And if he is, then it's worth it. And I think he's better than wide receiver 3. That's my opinion. But that's a big if. Colson, same thing. I could ultimately. Here's my question: on the current construct of the team, a starting middle linebacker for the next, let's say, 6 years. I'm not going to go 10, but let's say 5 or 6 years, meaning they get a second contract, and that's Colson at 38. That is far more valuable to me than wide receiver 3 for now. But you hope to be building. So I just don't know where they.
I think for me, like in the first round or second round, right? If wide receiver 3 needs to end up being your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 next year.
Right.
If you're just drafting a Ladd McConkey, that to me doesn't do enough. That to me is not good. And I like Ladd McConkey. Don't get me wrong. But the problem with Ladd McConkey that I have is that you have to scheme and create opportunities for a guy like Ladd McConkey, who is only going to be a slot guy. And he could be one of the best slot guys for a team like the Chiefs, for a team like the Vikings. I think of those kinds of teams.
Yep, I agree.
Obviously, the Rams, because they could have like 13,000 slot guys and they all somehow work on the outside. But those are guys that scheme that is a luxury pick for those teams. Well, kind of maybe a need now since Rashee Rice is gone, but we're going to be suspended. But for the Titans, to me, that's not the pick that you need when you're looking at your wide receiver 3 in the first 2 rounds. When you're looking at your wide receiver 3 in the first 2 rounds,
he better be a future.
That could be a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 next year.
And this is what Glory says. He says,
that's different, though, when I'm in the 4th or 5th round. I view that differently.
Completely agree with you. Glory Day says linebacker 1 today or wide receiver 1 a year from now. I think that's exactly the way you look at it. The question is, does this team have enough capital to be making picks for next year? And certainly, absolutely, Odunze and Neighbors help you this year. But it's not going to matter necessarily, right? Like it's almost more important next year.
If you don't take an offensive tackle, right? In the first,
totally agree.
Doesn't Neighbors really help alleviate a lot of that? issues because you can't crowd the box, right? Like
I like Brock Bowers better than Malik Neighbors. That's it. I like him better as a player, as a football player.
And in a vacuum, I don't really have a big gripe with that. It's just that in the role of the Tennessee Titans and how they have to get there, it's a difficult pill to swallow. It's kind of like taking Dallas Turner or taking Olu Fashanu or OT3 or something. It's like it's not as sexy as Malik Neighbors or high end as Malik Neighbors,
but it helps you now.
But it does help.
Yeah.
It's just like it just makes life difficult for you in terms of the rest of the draft if you can't find a trade back. Like that to me is the big thing. You have to find trade back opportunities in the first 2 rounds somehow, some way.
There are 2 ways to sort of analyze each pick. There's like a positional strategy, and then there's like how good is the prospect. And we as outsiders not in the building, we can have our assumptions about what we think strategy is and then separately which players we like. I think you have to have all these conversations in the first 2 rounds, maybe the 3rd round if you're including that round, but maybe the first 2 days is smart. Which, by the way, you can buy tickets to our draft party for the first 2 days. Come out and hang out, and you can get all this stuff in person. One of them is going to be off the record. We're going to say all the real shit we can't say on the show. You have to sort of assume that if they take J.C. Latham or Brock Bowers or Dallas Turner, Malik Neighbors, whatever the strategy is, like you have to say to yourself, this guy is going to play for my team for 2 contracts. Like he is a starting NFL player for 2 contracts. And if you cannot say that about the player, don't fucking draft him. Like that's it.
100%. Don't draft bad players.
If they get Dallas Turner at edge as a pass rusher and he is a 2 contract guy for this team, it will have been a great pick. If they take Brock Bowers and he plays for 2 contracts for this team, it will have been a great pick. Say the same thing for Alt, Neighbors, Fashanu, Latham, whatever. Like that. Yeah. That has to be the case, no matter what they do. All right, so let's say they get the round 3. Let's say they go offensive lineman, and they take a defensive player at 38, whatever it might be. It could be Colson. Let's say it's Darius Robinson. It could be a corner. Who knows? But they have not looked at wide receiver yet. 3rd round happens. They haven't traded back. 3rd round happens. They're now on the clock at 106. Who do you think is still available? Is Malachi Corley still available?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I don't think Keon Coleman's available.
I don't know. And even if Keon Coleman was, there's a reason he's available after all this draft hype for everybody. There's a reason he's available in the 4th.
I like
Malachi Corley's kind of a guy. Malachi Corley's kind of a guy that I have a hard time placing where the NFL views him. And he kind of had an auspicious from Senior Bowl to now kind of like combine. There was he didn't want to test at the combine, didn't want to measure, and they wanted him to do running back drills. Or I think he was willing to do running back drills, but then, and all this stuff. So he's very interesting. We haven't really got a lot of insight to wide receivers that they could target on day 3. They haven't brought any in for a visit that are technically day 3 guys. I mean, maybe Roman Wilson falls. You never know.
But that speaks to your exact point. If you're going to draft a receiver, it needs to be a future number 2 at worst. Yeah, which is why
that's the thing. I have a hard time placing what Malachi Corley could be. I think he could be Deebo Samuel, but I think that's asking a lot from a guy.
Agree.
I think that's asking a lot from anybody. I mean, you see it all the time, but I think that's asking a lot.
I don't think he has the lower body. Deebo Samuel had lower body running back strength in college.
Yeah, I don't think in the 4th round you're going to find a guy unless you got extremely, extremely lucky that is for sure going to be wide receiver 2. And I don't think there's a lot of guys that project to be wide receiver 2 in the 4th round. So you have to change your approach.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, along those lines, Keon Coleman not going to be there. Lab McCompy not going to be there. Ricky Pearsall not going to be there. Roman Wilson not going to be there. Both the Texas guys not going to be there, I assume. So, like, are we talking Brendan Rice, Malachi Corley, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker? Is that the group we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, like, in the Javon Baker, I would be surprised if he's there. And so I kind of think that you're looking at Jermaine Burton.
I don't like that.
Yeah, I don't really like it. I don't like any of the Washington guys. I like Jermaine Burton, but I don't like the attitude and the baggage that he brings. And right now, you're in a newborn infantile state, right? With your locker room culture. So I don't know if introducing an element like that's particularly good timing, even if the talent is there for Jermaine Burton.
So you don't
I
like
hate I think the other two Washington guys are just products of their
Penix in the system. Yeah.
Penix in the system. I do not trust either of them. I think they are both guys that are they're like bargain bin Lad McConkey, where you have to generate how they get open. And again, that's creating extra work. You need guys that can automatically get open. I don't like Brennan Rice necessarily because I think Brennan Rice is just, I just don't see it right now. In that round, I'd be willing, first off, I'd pound the table for Malik Washington. I'm a big Malik Washington guy. He is only going to be your slot guy, but he's going to be a very, very excellent slot guy that maybe turns into a Tyler Lockett or something of that ilk. But I love me some Malik Washington. I like Jamari Thrash. He's very technically sound. I like Jacob Cowing. He's kind of the same deal.
Jamari Thrash is very well coached. Jamari Thrash.
Yes. And Luke McCaffrey's kind of in there. A guy, if you really want to take a chance on a guy, and this could solve both your Brock Bowers issue and your wide receiver.
Don't you say Johnny Wilson. Don't you say Johnny Wilson.
I think Johnny Wilson's getting a bad rap. And if you draft Johnny Wilson and you don't try him at wide receiver, you are being ridiculous. I don't know how you can like Kean Coleman but not like Johnny Wilson.
Because I think Johnny Wilson is a less dog version of Jawan Jennings.
Yeah, I like me some Johnny Wilson.
I don't think he's.
I think in the fourth round, I think in the fourth round, I think you got something in Johnny Wilson because he can either be tight end or wide receiver, right?
I think you have to have Jawan Jennings makeup, like an absolute physical dog, to make that transition. Because I don't think he's explosive enough and does enough at the position to be like a wide receiver 2. Like, is he a good wide receiver 3 or 4? Like, I'd rather have NWI than Johnny Wilson. How about that?
Oh, I definitely wouldn't.
All right, let me ask you.
Where am I looking at here?
We've got Josh Cephas out of UTSA is a name that people have mentioned. I know you've mentioned Taj Washington before as well. Everyone's loving Johnny. Chili mode. I love Johnny Wilson. I would be elated here, Chili. Multiple posts
I think there's some untapped potential with Johnny Wilson, and that's what you're looking for in these 4th and 5th rounds.
Yeah,
a guy that someone mentioned him. And I don't know where it went, but 4th round's too rich. 5th round's probably the sweet spot, but he's likely a 6th round draft prospect. And it's a wild range of outcomes but there you go. Uncle Drew, Ryan Flournoy. I've been a Flournatic for a while, and I have not talked about him in a long time, but Ryan Flournoy seems like a guy. He's got the athleticism. He's got the size, and he's got the production that they look for. And I think that Ryan Flournoy could be a guy that could be I don't think he'd ever be a wide receiver 1, but if you're getting a wide receiver 2 in those day 3 rounds, I think you're still getting a good value. So
Derek says hard no on Burton, says Derek. There you go. I'm just getting some comments in here. So yeah, go ahead with Taj.
I like Taj. I think he's a for sure 5th round guy. I like him less than I like Malik. And what's been great about my Malik Washington propaganda that has came over at stackinginbox.com is that Dane Brugler agrees. He had him as like wide receiver 13, 14, or 15. Can't remember which one it was, but he's one of those. And I'm in on Malik Washington for this team. It does not solve your next year. Guess what you're going to have to be doing? Drafting a wide receiver. And I'm trying to break the cycle, but if you can't break the cycle in the first 2 rounds, you're going to have to settle for what you can get. And I like me some Malik Washington at the 4th round.
All right, 4th round. 7th round
to be my go-to right there.
7th round, I like Anthony Gould out of Oregon State. I like his game. Could do some returning game, athletic off the charts.
That's what you're drafting there. You're drafting guys that can return, and that's about it.
But I think I like Oregon State players. Fuaga, the running back Damian Martinez, I think is going to be an NFL player for a long time. He's not out in the draft this year. He'll be out next year. But they are extremely well coached. Jonathan Smith has done an extremely good job. He's the coach now at Michigan State. And so I think Anthony Gold, with his athletic talent and off the charts, like sort of just general athletic stuff and the ability to return kicks, I think a 7th-round pick. I really like him out of Oregon State. So that's a name that I really like. I saw Drake Stoops getting drafted in one mock draft. I was like, what?
No. I'll tell you who made the Stacking the Inbox draft profile. Drake Stoops.
Oh, okay. Slot only, 7th round. Yeah.
I mean, he's on there. He's on the list. I was like, I have no until Stoney had him on this list. I had no clue that this guy existed.
He was the go-to. He was the number one go-to receiver for Oklahoma, and he's like 5'10", 189. The coach's son, who doesn't look like he deserves to play, but like was making all the big catches for Oklahoma in critical situations. He was brilliant against Texas. If you go back and watch the game against Texas where they won. But I was shocked to see him in Stacking the Inbox and in Athlon Sports Draft Magazine. I was shocked to see him even listed as a prospect because he's one of those guys that I know a lot about because he's Bob Stoops' son, and so it's interesting to see him sort of pop up as like a slot only. Oh, the coach's son. He's the white coach's son who knows how to run routes.
I think the guy. I think there's 3 guys that you could get in the 6th or 7th, but they need so much development and patience. But I think that there actually could be guys. Bub Means, Jalen Coker, and Josh Cephas. But those guys need a load of development and time. And they don't solve your issue this year. They don't solve your issue next year, but they could solve your issue in year 3.
I keep coming around to this. I don't think you can solve next year's issue beyond the 38th pick. And
I would say that it'd be very unlikely.
And it feels like doing that hurts. To your point about Bowers, which is I think you're right about this. If you take Bowers, it hurts the rest of your roster development. I think trying to draft a 3 for this year and a 2 or a 1 for next year and the year after hurts your roster development. That's where I have my
I would say outside of the top 3 or a trade back for like Brian Thomas
with an extra pick.
I will generally agree with that because I do think it makes it more difficult. I think the other 3 wide receivers, the top 3 wide receivers can mask other issues that may arise. It's kind of like I think Joe Alt can mask also the wide receiver 3 issue. I do think that there is ways to mask it, but it has to be the top 3. Drafting wide receiver at 38 is really a tough pill for me to swallow logistically.
I agree. I completely agree. Just like drafting a tight end at 13 or 11 or whatever it would be. And it doesn't mean that those 2 players you don't get at those 2 spots might not be very good. It just logistically it messes up your process.
You'd have to go alt 7 for me to be in on. You can't go Dallas Turner 7.
Agree.
And wide receiver at 38.
Agree. All right, so I know we're late here, and maybe we push this to Monday's episode, but we've been getting so much reaction and feedback on our Predator show. By the way, the Gold Standard Podcast. Make sure you check that out because I've been going to games now recently. They're making the playoffs, and I've been seeing a lot of what I would consider like game day violations for apparel. And I want to talk football versions of this because I've seen so much of that shit at Nissan Stadium over the years. So I'm seeing you're out on third-party jerseys at games, right? Like third team, you're out on that, right? So I was at the Preds.
I think jerseys are silly to begin with.
I agree.
But like I was at a Titans preseason game where the Packers weren't playing and someone had a Brian Brom jersey on. Like why?
Oh my God!
Why do you have a Brian?
They actually must be from Louisville. Like so, I went to the Vegas Preds game, and I saw a Connor Bedard jersey. Now, if you're a Chicago fan and you're trolling the Preds, I understand that. But like, if you're gonna go to a Titans Jags game and wear a Colts jersey, I mean, again, trolling, but like, I don't understand.
Do you not have anything else in your fucking closet that you can wear? Why does?
What are you doing there?
You know what I'm saying?
what are you doing at the game? I don't understand. So here's the other thing that happened at a Preds game that I saw. It was a Preds Jets game on Tuesday, and it was two people wearing Ellie Tolvanen jerseys, a former Pred, but they were Seattle Kraken jerseys. So this would be like coming to a Titans Jaguars game and wearing like a David Long Dolphins jersey. I don't understand. If you wear a Derrick Henry, if you want to buy a Ravens Derrick Henry jersey, because Derrick Henry's the most popular player in Nashville or whatever for 10 years and a huge Titans fan favorite, I think there are certain players that rise above the threshold, right? Where it's okay for you to go buy a jersey because you love the player so much. But if you have a Wesley Woodyard or a David Long or a Malcolm Butler or I don't know, like a former player but with a different team, who are you rooting for?
This is just why I'm against jerseys. Spend your money elsewhere.
What about Jarrell Casey? Would if you saw a Denver Broncos Jarrell Casey jersey, would you be like, okay, I understand, or would you be like,
they're not playing the Broncos? I'd be
they're
like,
not playing, and they're not playing the Broncos.
Yeah. You guys you're weird. You're a weird person.
I agree. I just think I've seen so much weird shit at Bridgestone Arena the last couple of weeks, and I'm just look as someone who saw Peyton Manning jerseys in Nissan Stadium for 15 years, right? Colts jerseys while the Titans were playing the Raiders or whatever, absolutely ridiculous. But at least Peyton, there's some logic to the Peyton love because he was a Tennessee Volunteer and everybody loves him. But I don't know. The grown men should not wear jerseys, number one. You should not wear jerseys anywhere but at the stadium or at your house. And certainly not a jersey of a team that is not playing or a player that's not playing. If it's a Titans jersey and it's a former player, fine, go for it. Wear it. That's totally acceptable. Yeah. You're supporting your team. But I don't know. I've seen so much weird shit at Bridgestone Arena, and I know it happens at Nissan Stadium, and I wanted to. I was worried that you were going to say something different than what you've said today.
No, I'm anti jerseys.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that. Okay, Zach and Chili and Derek and Bo and Stoney and Uncle Drew and Glory Day and James and all you guys that have been here. I'm sure I forgot a lot of you guys. Please, if you're in town and you want to come to the draft party, check out the YouTube show notes. We will have links in both the podcast and the YouTube show notes for both tickets on Thursday night. There's plenty of tickets left on Thursday night, but they're going. And then Friday night, there's only a handful of tickets left. So if you want them, all the money goes to charity. We're going to watch the draft. We're going to do content. We're going to have a good time. All you can eat, all you can drink, catered, the whole deal. It's going to be a great time, so please come on out. Make sure you subscribe to StackInTheInbox.com. Football and Other F Words, Paul Karski Podcast, Music City Audible. You got Easton and the guys and JT doing Hot Read Podcast, and on all the other shows across the network, Nashville SC, Club and Country, Predators, Gold Standard, SEC Football Live on the YouTube page as well. So come hang out and support the team, support the companies, and support our partners, Sinkers Beverages, and the Kingston Group as well. So I think that's everything. Obviously, the next generation is soft, and that's just the way it's going to be. But maybe that wins football games. For Zach, I am Braden. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend. We will talk to you on Monday. Good night. Goodbye, friends.